Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Charles from the channel Books on Stereo, and I'm here to bring a really special interview with the Ruby Lang. Ruby Lang is an amazing Asian romance author, and like we all have been pushing for in BookTube, we always want to diversify our TBR. And if you haven't been reading her books, I'm like, you need to like reevaluate some things because her books are absolutely excellent. So, hi Ruby, how are you doing today?
Hi, it's so good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. No, thank you for coming on my channel. Like you're a big time author. I was like, she probably won't have time for my little old channel. Thank you.
You know what? You called me a big time author, and I think that I'm basically forever going to be like, yes, I am, and also you're a big time YouTuber. So there we go.
Oh, stop. But my first question for you is, how did you get into writing romance? Were you always a romance reader, or what's a little bit about your story of how you became an author?
So I was always a big reader. I was one of those kids who read at the dinner table and was scolded for it and things like that. So at some point in my teen years, my parents got me a box of like Harlequins from a garage sale, probably. I don't even know. Origins are murky. And so, yeah, and I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. I just went through them like candy. So I read them, and one of them I remember was an Anne Stewart, which, if you've ever read any Anne Stewart, she's been around a long time. It was absolutely bonkers. It was bonkers, and I thought I need more of this in my life. But you know what
Yes.
ended up happening? Because when you're a teen, you don't always end up getting more of it in your life. So I went off to university and I got a literature degree because of aforesaid reading addiction.
Mhm,
And then I started reading serious literature. But
mhm,
I also read stuff like chick lit, and I loved
mhm,
that the whole time. But you know, for a long time, I thought, okay, I'm going to be a literary writer, else I'll write nonfiction, and I did end up doing those things. I've written,
mhm,
for the New York Times and the Post and places like that, and I had a literary novel published when I was a lot younger. Um,
mhm.
but so I'm trying to angle my camera correctly here. So at a certain point, after I'd had a kid, um, reading sort of wasn't. I had a hard time reading.
Mhm,
And when it's really connected to your identity, I'm sure you know all about this.
mhm.
When you are like a reader and then you can't read anymore, that is a serious thing.
It hurts.
And yeah, like it who are you who am I at this point, right? Um, so I thought, okay, I'm gonna try all sorts of different books. Maybe I'll read a romance. I used to love those, right?
Mhm,
So I went and I looked for some recommendations, and I ended up reading. I think one of the first ones was a Jennifer Cruzy book.
Oh,
It was
okay.
Bet Me,
Mhm,
and I was like, okay, this is great. Okay, more of this. And the great thing about reading, especially, when I started out reading, it was all paperbacks and hardbacks. And
mhm.
now at this point, I could connect to the library online, and there were hundreds of
It's
books. And of course, I tried to read hundreds and hundreds of books. So it became a really big deal for me. And I would talk about it all the time. And my husband said, you talk about this all the time and you think about romance books all the time. Maybe you should write one.
Mhm,
And I said, that never occurred to me at all, to tell you the truth. And
mhm,
so that was really how it started. At the same time, I was also writing about romance books for this now defunct website called The Toast, which had this sort of like cult following.
mhm,
And it was really great to be able to talk to people who read these books too.
mhm,
So the journey was really great because the second coming of romance for me was sort of social in a way. Like I would talk with
mhm,
people about them, and then
mhm,
I would also try to write it. So it wasn't like the struggling artist alone in their garret type of thing. I was
mhm.
you know finally finding people to talk to about this, and it was really good.
Mhm.
It was, and it's been really great ever since.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, that's really interesting. I have almost a very similar story. Like I used to read very heavily, probably around like it was like probably as soon as I graduated out of picture books, like that age, I was like chapter books. I'm like, oh, these are too long. I can't read
mhm.
them. And then somehow, like, I started reading classics in high school, and I was like, this is like amazing. Like, give me more Wuthering Heights, give me Jane Eyre, give me all these like dark classics. And I just loved them so much. But then I became more reading, like, my my reading became more for education, like how to pass a test or how to write an essay on this book rather than entertainment wise. So it probably took me until college and I started listening to audiobooks. I was like, okay, now
Oh,
I'm actually enjoying the book because when I read it, I'm like reading for like the points, like the things I can pick out to write some quotes that I can use, like the symbolism, the thematic elements of the book. So like it's weird to like separate my brain from going in that mode. When I'm
yeah,
reading a book with an audio, so I'm like, okay, let's turn the brain off and let's just enjoy the story. And that's like let's nitpick everything that's going
yeah,
on in the book.
exactly. Reading becomes not reading, but analysis, right?
Hmm.
It becomes this work that you do, and
Hmm.
sometimes you just want the story to wash over you.
Yeah, you just want to feel the feels, you want the emotions, you want to be in these characters' heads, and that's a great segue because I really want to talk to you about the Uptown Collection. So if you guys haven't read it, it's a set of three books. I would say like around they're around 5 hours each on audio, so around like maybe 200 to 300 pages, and they're absolutely amazing. I devoured it. So I wanted to ask you, what was your idea behind the series? Did it just kind of come to you one day?
So I was looking around for something to write. I had finished a series
Hmm.
called the Practice Perfect series, which is about doctors living in Portland. And one of the things that I do, so I live in New York City, where Uptown is set. And one of the things that I love to do is I love to eavesdrop. I am nosy, terrible person who eavesdrops on every conversation. And one of the things I love is how people talk in New York City, because
Hmm.
they do it loud. There's because we live in like a sort of a more cramped space. You can't have a private conversation in your home all the time. Sometimes you have to do it on the subway or on the
Hmm.
sidewalk. And so there are a lot of stories. And so I walked around and I thought I should probably try to write something about stuff that I hear that I pick up.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and the other thing is I love the idea, in a movie sometimes they'll do a big aerial shot of something and
Yeah.
then they zoom down to, one little house or one little apartment. And I thought to
Yeah.
myself, that is exactly what I want to do with my stories. And
Ah,
that's always
okay.
kind of what I've wanted to do. Like you
Hmm.
get the feeling of this large metropolis and then you
Hmm.
go down into these intimate little stories. And they're short. They're pretty short. They're novellas. They're
Hmm.
all three of them are novellas. And I just wanted to get that feeling of you know living in a larger sort of um, area and also living with a lot of other people around you, but also just getting down to those feelings between two people in my case, and just
Hmm.
just drilling down into that. Um,
Hmm.
so that's what I wanted to do. I also, because I walk around a lot too,
Hmm.
there's stuff in my neighborhood that I notice. Here is
Hmm.
a garden that has sprung up instead of this empty lot that it used to be. That actually
Hmm.
happened in my neighborhood. There was a
Oh.
sort of dilapidated old garden and old lot, and then
Hmm.
people and then they put chickens in the city, and it was so
In New
awesome.
York?
Yeah, there's
That's so
there's
random.
I know, it was so cool. So like, I'd go and I'd say hello to the chickens all the time. And I thought that, that's a really cool thing. And then, you always hear stories about weird roommate situations, So one of the last book in the series, in this book, the collection, is House Rules, which is about an ex-wife and husband who end up living together again. And that is something that actually happens, you know? So,
Oh wow.
oh,
I thought it was like taking that trope, like there's like the only one bed trope, but just like magnifying it and just making it like
it's
they're in one
real. That's
apartment.
why it's real. That's why it's a trope. So, like, no, and seriously, I was talking with somebody else who was interviewing me for a podcast, and one of the hosts was like, I should say it's learning the tropes. Um,
Hmm.
the host Clayton was like, that happened to me. So it was. I mean, he's so great, but yes, he was like, yeah, that I had to live with an ex for a while, and I was like, it happened. See, so
Wow. I thought that was
because
just like something you only see like it's like the perfect storm where everything falls into place. And it's
mhm.
usually like, oh, and there's only one bed. Wink wink the romance author, and you're like, okay. Like now we know. Like you're basically forcing them together at this point, but I did not know that actually happened.
No, I mean, because
Wow.
it's either that or else you live in a closet, right? Or else you move out of the city or things like that.
Hmm.
So these are things that happen. There are like so many
Oh.
stories out there. So yeah, or else you end up with like an apartment with and I actually saw one of these with a
Mhm.
shower in the kitchen. Yeah.
That's kind of unsanitary. But I guess it's convenient if you want to have breakfast and take your shower at the same time or something. There has to be like
Oh
a use case
my god.
where someone thought like that would be a smart idea. Like, let's put the shower in the kitchen.
Right. It makes the shower beers easier, apparently. Who knows?
Any mess, you just take the hose of the shower and just spray it down.
Yeah.
So
So,
it's like it kind of has some uses.
exactly. So actually, maybe it's very sanitary. There you go. So,
But I love that. Like one of the things that I love about this collection is that even though they are on the short side, it doesn't feel short. Like you get complete character arcs, you get backstory on the characters, you get a fully realized setting for the characters, and the romantic arc feels like it has like a clear beginning, middle, and end for the couple. And I was shocked when I was reading this because like you're so laser focused with your writing and with your characters. So like on page one, the characters already know who they are, the situation is already set up for them, and then you still get so many nice twists and turns. I was like, how did she do this? Usually novellas are hard sells. Like they usually are like too much on the smutty side, where they're just like the characters see each other instant lust, and then like the epilogue, the four epilogues that they include are like them getting married and having kids, and it's like whoa, 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 whoa. You just met this person like a day ago, and you're already in love, and then like in the epilogue, you already are married, and then have 10 kids in the next epilogue. It's like sometimes you miss that progression, but then on the other hand, sometimes you have like all the build up in the novella, but then nothing actually happens on the romantic side between the two characters because you spent so much time setting the characters up. I was like, how did you kind of strike that balance between character plot and romantic arc?
well, first of all, um, like I have a lot of trouble writing long, or
Mm.
actually, as other people call it, regular length. So, yeah, my agent would like to talk to me a little bit more about this. But in any case, enough about me. So I am very I really do write short. That's my
Mhm.
sort of natural length, unfortunately, fortunately, whatever we want to call it. Um, but the other thing is, I really did, as my goal, set out to be like this. to do the whole, to zoom in on those characters right down and just, I just want to know who they were. And I think that's the thing that really is maybe what it's about. I really want to focus on character, and that's really what ends up determining the plot for me more. What
Okay.
are they going to do? What is the natural thing for them to do? What is the thing that they're fighting against? All of these questions have to be answered. And, but how many kids they have, that doesn't need to be answered, whether
I
or
was
not
like,
they
do we
have
really
kids.
care?
Yeah,
I
well,
was
I
like,
mean, some people do.
I'm
But
fine. Like, I no shade to those people, but I'm like, we're here for the romance, not like an epilogue that you tacked on at the end. Like, romance can kill me with like five epilogues. I'm like, it kind of defeats the purpose of having an epilogue when you have five of them. It's like, imagine if a book had five prologues, like five. You'd be like, okay, this is enough.
5 prologues, oh my God. I'm like, oh boy. I don't think I would last through this. I don't even know if I'd last through the first one, but you do you. Everybody's different. But you really do have to be efficient, and you really do have to ask yourself a lot of these questions. Like, what is the end? What what is the thing that makes you happy, but not like it doesn't over sweeten the plot? Maybe you don't want to maybe go a little too far, and maybe I don't go far enough. Sometimes, who knows? It works for you, and I am so happy about that because this is the kind of thing that works for me too. Um, but I mean, I do understand epilogues though, because I do understand that people really want to know that characters are happy, and sometimes you really got to underline it for,
For some readers.
yeah, for some readers. And I get that, like sometimes maybe you do feel a little bit unsure, like how are they ever going to solve this? And maybe you do need to fast forward a couple of years because, you can't solve it in this amount of time.
In the book.
So, um, but in a novella, not too much, I guess.
Yeah.
So I like restraint
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to writing, I think. And maybe that doesn't serve, it doesn't work for everybody, but I'm glad I found you. You're my
Yeah.
reader.
No, because like just from reading, I don't like reading a bunch of unnecessary things that the characters go through. Like, why are we going here? Why are you having this conversation? Why are you doing this? Because if I have to, especially if there's no audiobook available and I have to physically read the book, I pay attention so much more to pacing because I'm like, okay, you didn't need this scene, you didn't need this scene. Then all of a sudden, this is written a lot faster. It's easy to get through versus this. It's like, okay, info dump, info dump, info dump. So like, I notice more things when I'm
Mhm.
actually reading, and especially with novellas, I want the chemistry to be built. I want the characters to already know who they are by page one because you don't have a ton of time. So you really have to focus on what is your main story, what is your point, and then just flesh that out a little bit more. And that's one of the things that I love about your books, and then how casually diverse they are. Like you have diverse characters. You don't have to go through the whole mantra of like, oh, let's explain this person's race or have them insert like racist side character that one of the characters has to deal with. It's just to introduce like unnecessary conflict. So I just love how you just have this world that reflects our own world, and it just
Yeah.
is.
And this is the thing, like when I go outside, this is what I'm seeing. I don't see it isn't like I don't live in a white neighborhood. I don't, um, all my friends are not all white. This is, I was trying to talk about a little bit about the kind of place I lived, and I'm just so happy that that you see that, and that's something you appreciate, because it's something that I really love about being here too. And it doesn't have to be like, when race is the central conflict of a story, or when it's the conflict of a story, that means it's a problem. And
Mm-hmm.
my race is not a problem. It's
Mm-hmm.
who I am. It's not
Mm-hmm.
an issue. It's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I really wanted that to be um, a part of what I write, not just these
Mm-hmm.
stories, but all the stories that I write. And if it's an issue, then it's your issue. Well, not yours, but it's another
Mm-hmm.
person's issue. So I'm so glad that you thought it was handled well and handled. I hate that
Yeah,
word
it wasn't even
too.
handled. It
Yeah,
was just like it
yeah,
was just there, and like
yeah,
because so much, I would say, from my reader's perspective, so much of romances that are like the popular romances usually feature a white couple. That's usually the default. So when I do get books where it's just casually diverse, I'm like, oh, okay, that's great. Or like, I just don't like where you interject like an interracial romance, and one of the obvious problems is that they're interracial. I
yeah.
was
I
like,
hate making that the
you can do
center. Yeah,
other plots and like make race the main like obstacle. Like, oh, his family won't accept this person of this race. I'm like, come on, like unless you're in a historical setting, you can kind of like get away with that a little bit. But even now, like romance is fiction at the heart of it. So like
and for that,
you don't have to be bound by that.
exactly. And for that matter, interracial. We tend to talk about it. A lot of people tend to talk
Hmm.
about it as like white and not white. It does
Hmm.
not have to be that way.
Hmm. Hmm.
In like Open House, for instance, the main characters are Asian and Afro Latina.
Hmm.
They are, it interracial does not have to be white with some
Wait with someone else.
margin. Yes, exactly. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that I'm seeing a lot more books
Hmm.
featuring couples who are not, either of them necessarily white, but also just, where we see the pairings that we see in life, basically.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
like it's a weird sort of amnesia sometimes, but I really
Hmm.
do. I'm really seeing so many of these books, and I guess now that I know how to look for them too, that's the other thing.
Mm,
So
yeah.
it's just I feel like it's been a great era, and and indie publishing has really helped with this too. So
Hmm.
yeah, love seeing it.
Yeah, I think in the past couple of years, I've seen like you have Talia Hibbert doing
Yes,
amazing things with the Brown Sister trilogy. Um, Helen
love
Huang,
it.
like I was like, oh, like
Hmm.
those books are steamy. I was like, I was not prepared, and the characters are just Asian on the autism spectrum, and it's just that, and it's their romance. There isn't any inner turmoil that the characters have to deal with, like being a certain racial identity is just is their identity, and you're not
Hmm.
seeing stories tied to like oppression. Like in the Brown sisters, they're all really wealthy. They're a wealthy family, and the kiss quotient, the heroine in that one is like a big time data analysis. I think I could be wrong. It's been a while since I read it, but yeah, I just love the space. And I think one of the reasons what definitely want to interview you is because I wanted to bring more of these voices out in our community. So people, instead of like going to pick up like LJ Shen's newest book or like X like some like big like indie author that usually might write white romances. I think it's like now more and more booktubers are like, hey, where are the diverse authors? Where can we find them? Like we're looking for them because honestly, like I need to see on the cover, like right there. I'm like, oh, okay, this is an interracial romance. Oh, hey, we have an Asian hero, or hey, we have like an Afro Latina hero, or have we have an African American hero, like hero. So like I like seeing that representation on the cover. I think these books do an absolutely excellent job of just realizing that diversity and just making it normal instead of just like the all white, like everyone's like super good looking, idealized world that we tend to get in a lot of romances. It's fine. I like that escapism sometimes, but like every now and then I want to see like real life almost reflected a little bit more in romance books. I think your books do an excellent job at that.
Thank you. And this is not to say that people haven't been writing diverse romances all along.
Mm-hmm.
Like there have just been so many great writers in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I think the great thing about now is that it's so much easier to find them.
Mm-hmm.
And like, because now you can, I mean, before you had the internet, basically, it's just like
Mm-hmm.
you have your library and maybe your
Mm-hmm.
librarian's recommendations. And if you know how to use the card catalog, maybe you can do that. But like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you even look for this? And now it's
Yeah.
just so great. Like, there's just this trove of stories that
Mm-hmm.
are appearing now, but also that you can look into from the past. And it's just been wonderful. So
Yeah.
love this time. Love it.
Me too. And like I wanted to say my favorite book in the whole trilogy is Open House. It is I love enemies to lovers, but it's really what the heroine goes through, kind of changing careers and like changing so many degrees that like now she's just like in so much debt because she just couldn't figure out what she wanted to do. And now she's like trying to work her way to pay off that debt to try to find what she wants to do. So I was like, I get that existentialism, like I get that conflict. Like for some reason that just like resonated with me so hard. I think most people in their 20s can like resonate with that a little bit because it's like that is so true. No one talks about like not knowing exactly what you did and not knowing exactly what you want to do and jumping around. And then also there's a huge financial burden that you end up accruing if you like do two master programs and then you do like another master program, you do like another like you get some more education and it's like wow, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I really, really like that. Like was that a conscious decision that you wanted to touch on a little bit in that book?
Yeah. First of all, I am so glad that you love Open House and that it's your favorite because it is like the quintessential middle child. I feel like people usually
Mm,
talk about the first one because they've read it because it's like the first in the series,
it's the
or else
first
the
time.
last one, right? Like people often read the first in the series and then that's it. And so it's like, well, I'm done with that series because I know what it's all about. And then
Mm-hmm.
the second one, it's like we don't talk about it. But to answer your actual question, um, I made a conscious decision to write about her being in debt, in student debt, because it
Mm-hmm.
is something that a lot of my friends have to deal with all the time, basically. We are taught that, education will get you out of debt, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The more education you have, your the debt will somehow go away. But that,
Magically disappear.
yeah, like because you've learned all this stuff and then you can be
Mm-hmm.
hired and then you can pay off your debt. Like that's how it's supposed
Mm-hmm.
to work, right? Doesn't necessarily work that way.
Yeah.
Um so like almost every conversation, I've had like happy conversations where people say I paid off a big chunk of my debt. I've had sad
Mm-hmm.
conversations where people will say to me, I couldn't put a down payment on a house because, you know, uh,
Mm.
I have
Because you
all
have
this
student
debt.
loan debt.
Right. It's it's a
Mm-hmm.
it's a real thing. I don't know how romantic that is. um, but at the same time,
Yeah.
this is what people have to go through. And as a person who also has like switched careers and has been in a family where, my family members have switched careers,
Mm-hmm.
it's not always going to be a path where you're just like, I know exactly what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to learn the thing that I'm supposed to do and then do the thing I'm supposed to do. That hardly ever happens, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very only for like some people who like know from day one that they're just like tunnel vision. They're like that's what I want, nothing else. That's what I'm going for. But I think most people. So I appreciate that so much because I was like, I get that. I like completely get it. It was like not really anything to the romance. Like I love the romance aspect. I was like, but your books, these like three books, could like you could easily have taken the romance and just given me a straight contemporary, and I would have still loved following the characters because I think a lot of romances tend to rely too heavily on like the chemistry between the two characters, and there's really nothing else in the story to keep it going. if that makes any sense, because I kind of like break down like the mediocre romance is like I know like the third act twists where some obstacle comes up, and like I remember one book I was reading, I was like, she's gonna make this the author's gonna make this into a conflict to push our couple together. And I was like, I called it, it exactly happened. And so like I love how your books like there actually is meat to these stories, and then you have a nice romance that connects it all together. So I wonder like think of did you like kind of plot the story like separately from the romance to make sure that you're balancing both, or was it just kind of like natural when you were writing it?
Um, so I'm not very good at plotting, even though I try it all the time.
Hmm.
And that's maybe also the that also maybe ties into the fact that I tend to write short. Like I
Hmm.
it's again, it's about the character, what emerges from what I know about the character before I start writing, and what emerges as I'm writing too. But I do like I try to outline, but no, it doesn't come separately because I feel like they're really connected to each other. And if you don't
Hmm.
connect them to each other, then I don't know if your story, well, I don't know if my story is going to work at least.
Hmm.
I don't know because I do know a lot of people who read craft books and they're really good at putting these things together. I am not
Hmm.
one of them. Um,
You are
so
like
thank you.
these are amazing.
But
Don't undersell yourself.
but when it comes to like trying to figure it out,
Hmm.
like trying to sit there and just sort of go, okay, this is what has to happen next.
Hmm.
It kind of has to work a little bit more together for me at least. I can't
Hmm.
separate them out. I find it really difficult to and even if I do try to do that, it never ends up being that way. So
Hmm.
so usually,
Hmm.
the inner conflict and the outer conflict, I sometimes have trouble telling them apart because
Hmm.
they work together so much in my mind.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, so I don't. It's really important to me too that um, the books reflect something about the world that we live in,
Hmm.
and that because we're affected by it. Like you
Hmm.
can't just it. No matter how we try to, like, how no matter how I try. I'm going to just talk about me mostly because other people are different. Your
Hmm.
mileage may vary, but no matter how much I try to separate myself from the rest of the world, or else like try to create a bubble, of happiness
Hmm.
or whatever, um,
Hmm.
it doesn't really work. Like I live in this world. I am affected by the things that happen, and my characters are that way too. It's so if they can't afford to live in a place because they don't have enough money, that's going
Hmm.
to end up that's affects how they react to things. It affects their actions. It becomes part of their character.
Hmm.
It's all part of forming what their reactions would be and what their thoughts are, and it's all a piece to me.
Hmm.
um, and because this is the world that I live in, like I can't necessarily afford everything that I want, and money is a big part of it, and trying to be a good person, is while doing all these things is a part of it, and trying to, um, you know, trying to find out more about myself, is a part of it all too. And I think
Hmm.
that that's something that my characters struggle with too. Um,
Hmm.
they aren't me, but they're people I'd like to be friends with. I like to say
Hmm.
so,
Hmm.
and that's another part of it too.
Hmm. Yeah, and like one of the things that kind of came to mind as well, that's done so well in these books that you have tropes that are involved by like each of the books. I can pitch like each of the books to someone based on what tropes I know they like, but they aren't tropey. And then you also avoid kind of like some of the negative like character archetypes that you see in romance, like the alpha hole or the very submissive heroine that has like no agency whatsoever, and it's like a very weird power imbalance between the two main characters. So like this like how did you balance that, especially with like the enemies to lovers? Sure with open house. Usually enemies to lovers like sometimes will like just be because of a miscommunication and that's why they hate each other and then you're just like, wait, you could just like talk to the person and then it would have been resolved throughout the whole entire book, or it's like not really enemies to lovers. They really just kind of like they really were never enemies, but it was pitched to you that way. So I wonder how do you like how to navigate that space?
And it's hard too in a novella to do that, I think, too,
Mhm.
to establish that they're enemies and then have them not be enemies, without it being a really sudden switch. So part of it was that they had to have things that they liked about each other,
Mhm.
from the very beginning, and in the
Mm.
beginning, they actually, before they know their roles in this drama, there is attraction and they do like talking to each other. That's like in the first chapter.
Mhm.
Um, I've First chapters are really important because they
Mm.
really do set that stage.
They set the
And you
tone
have,
for the rest of the
yeah,
book.
they
You have to
do.
nail them.
You have to lay out everything
Mhm.
right there. And like on a side note, it's so interesting that a lot of people talk about this whole, um, do romances have to have a happily ever after? Do they not? Thing, right? And yeah, they do
Mhm.
actually have to have a happily ever after
Right.
because you're starting it in chapter one. It's People talk
Mhm.
about the ending, but it's not the ending in a romance that's important. It's also the beginning.
Mhm.
You set up that ending in chapter one. It is the
Mhm.
structural basis of your
Mhm.
entire book, getting to that ending from that beginning. So,
Mhm.
it's not like we just suddenly be tack on a whole like, oh, let's now part these two forever. Um, Too bad, so sad, goodbye, lovers, right? You,
Mhm.
it's not a random thing. You're starting it right at the beginning. It's the
Mhm.
underpinning. It's the spine of the entire book. So,
Mhm.
I don't even remember what the question was. Um,
It was about you. You kind of answered it a little. You answered it about like tropes and like
yeah,
archetypal, typical characters that you tend to see in romance, and then
yeah.
I think it. You do make a good point. I think yes, it has to end in a happily ever after, but sometimes I like where there's still some things left unresolved. Not everything is tied up with a bow. Like
Oh
I've seen
no.
some romances that like bend over backwards that the hero does like 20 horrible things. They just have like a chapter basically explaining how all those are miscommunications and then all these other issues with like other characters if they had any issues with them, those get magically resolved, and then all of a sudden it's like this overly sweet, like almost like it's like a little, it gives me almost like a little bit of a toothache, almost like a cavity. It's a little bit too sweet of a happily ever after. And I like these books because they end in a happily ever after, but it's not like okay, Ruby didn't just like go over the top, over the board, and just go like, oh, they loved each other, and then they had like 20 kids, and they never had any strife, and everything was like roses and sunshines for them forever. So I like how you still gave us the happily ever after, but was never like okay. I was like, it wasn't too much where you're just like, as a reader, you're like, really? You're just like, it was realistic, but also well earned. I think that's more the point I'm getting at. Like if you like you were mentioning with chapter one setting that up, if you set it up right, then the HA will work at the end, especially in novella because you just have so little time to set everything up to make the HA work. Because if it doesn't work, romance readers are not. They'll just be like, nah, sorry, the HA didn't work. Like there was no. You don't understand like why these two characters were together. What was their conflict? And like you just give us all these books. So like I really, really do love them.
Thank you so much. That's so wonderful to hear. And it's interesting because I I think that people do talk about that ending a lot, and maybe we talk about it too much. Like maybe we
Mm-hmm.
think about it as ending too much, and that's why people maybe they go over the top a little when they try to resolve things because they're thinking to themselves ending, ending, ending. But the other thing is,
Right.
I think that we all have really different definitions of happiness,
Mhm.
and so and arriving at that is a different point for everybody. For me, the ending, what it means is that you can have a vision of their future where they're together,
Mhm.
and that's vague enough, but it's also like, okay, I think they can start something here. Like the ending is
Mhm.
a start for me, I guess.
Mhm.
Well, a start for them.
Except for
Um,
them, yeah.
yeah. It doesn't. I don't have to like in these books especially. I don't feel like I need to like spell it out because they're starting something, and it might
Mhm.
also be tough too. But you know the main thing is they're starting it together,
Mhm.
um, and I love that. And to go back to earlier to the tropes thing that you were asking me about, yeah, I when I started out writing like an enemies to lover, this is absolutely my favorite thing to do because I love the banter. I
I
love
love
when
it.
people,
That's what makes it amazing. The banter, the snarky
yeah,
banter.
I love that spark that goes between the characters when they're talking to each other because like even as the words that come out of their mouth are maybe pretty harsh, or else
Mhm.
maybe they're sort of like cutting away at each other, they're also at their best when they're
Mhm.
bantering. Like they're at their worst because they're saying the worst things, but they're at their
To each other.
best because they're really showing each other like
Mhm.
how clever they are. They're it's a wonderful contradiction to be able to do that in an enemies to lover, and that's why it's so great to write that trope.
Mhm.
um but yeah, I do have sometimes, I try to write to a trope, but I kind of sometimes veer off a little bit. So yeah, I do sometimes have um difficulty like like following being tropey, I guess that's the thing. Because it's interesting to go off a little bit, to like start
Mhm.
out that way and to have this, to maybe that's the way I like defeating expectations. I don't like defeating all
Mhm.
expectations, but there are some ways where you can, I think it's really interesting to take tropes and turn them a little bit,
Mhm.
because it's almost like a new angle when you look at a picture and then you look at it a different way. Maybe
Mhm.
it's the same picture, but
Mhm.
maybe you're seeing something new. So
Yeah.
yeah, love that.
I hate to ask this question, but out of the three books, which one would you say you can either say was your favorite or what was your favorite one to write?
Oh, so my favorite one to write was House Rules because
Oh.
I well, so the first one, um, I went out on sub with that one. So I guess I had a lot of time, basically. Like
Mhm.
I had finished my other series. My publisher, Crimson Romance, the imprint that I wrote for, had closed down. Simon and
Oh.
Schuster. Simon and Schuster had bought it a year before, and then they sort of shut it down a year later. So I
Mhm.
was like a little bit adrift, so I had something to prove too, and so I had a lot of time to write it. But of course, when I have a lot of time to write things, then I take forever to write them, basically, because that's how much time I have, obviously,
Mhm.
right? And so it didn't come easily, and it's also the shortest one. It's the shortest one of all three books. And then by the second book, I was like, okay, I'm hitting my stride. I'm sort of getting it. I have my contract, and things are
Mhm.
going. And the third one, I didn't have all that much time, and I sort of had to submit like a synopsis of it. And I'm like, oh well, here goes. Hope this turns out. And then it ended up being the one that came out quickly and that came out smoothly, and that I looked back at the chapters, and I thought to myself, oh, well, this, I hadn't reread them. And then I
Mhm.
looked back at them and I thought, oh my God, it actually kind of turned out on the first try. Not quite the first try, but like, close
Mhm.
enough for me at least. So I was
Mhm.
like, wow. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm really lazy and that I didn't have to work on this one as much as I thought I would.
Hey, that's nothing wrong with that. Like if the book comes to you easier,
Yes,
like that's good. That's good for us, the readers, because then there's not going to be like a 2 year hiatus, or like
right.
some other
Exactly.
author's like, oh yeah, I'm working on it. 5 years have elapsed. They're like, we're still waiting on the third on this book. I was like, where is it? And the writer's like, I'm still working on it. It's not coming to me yet. I'm like, let it come to you faster.
No, and I totally understand that because like I'm a person I'm a super impatient reader. But I'm also the slowest writer in the world. So I'm not allowed to talk about this, honestly. But yeah, this one came to me much more quickly. And, maybe it's because I had practice, maybe it's because I had a deadline, but whatever it was, it's when you have chemistry with a book, basically.
Hmm.
That's what it was. It was my love story. Heart.
I feel like House Rules is to people that I know that have read it, that's their favorite because they feel like
Yeah.
it's more romance. It's like more romance heavy in that one. I personally like the second one. Second one's my favorite. The middle child one is my favorite. Like the other two books, I'm like Open House is my fave. I love them all, but Open House will always be my fave
I'm
just
I'm
because
so
that
glad.
one student deck conversation. I was like, she just won me over with this book. I was like,
Oh,
I felt
thank
bad for
you.
House Rules because I'm like, you're not Open House. You're not the
Ah,
same.
that's so funny. Well, see, because like, yeah, I can't actually pick a favorite child. And so I'm really glad that you love this neglected middle child because like it needs love. It really does, you know? So I'm so glad you're here for it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's my all-time favorite one. Like I love it. I love it so much. And then I also want to ask you, do you have any upcoming projects or anything that or stuff that hasn't been announced that is coming from you soon?
um, so I have turned in some stuff.
Ooh.
I don't know what the status of that stuff is at this point, but my
Okay.
agent has it. She's looking at it. And one of them is like a full length, glory be, a full length rom com from me. And then the other one is not quite as long, unfortunately.
Oh
And
no.
it is a lightly magical um, novella ish. So we'll
Ooh.
see how they all turn out. So, but it's like you said, mostly in the contemporary world. So,
Mhm.
like, if either of these come to fruition, you heard it first.
You guys
Yeah.
heard that correctly. You are getting a scoop before anyone else is getting the scoop on this. And like that's cool. I know like I guess this is a thing that popped up in romance, like older women, like that's borderline like women's fiction mixed with
Mhm.
romance, magical books. I did
Yeah.
not know that was a thing until like a couple months ago. I was like, wait, there's like this whole subcategory that I have not even realized was there.
I think that it's actually a concerted effort by a group of people because like I saw that
Mhm.
pop up too, like magical women's fiction. Um,
Yeah, I was like, what is
and
this?
and yeah, a whole group of I do remember that like a whole group of authors
Hmm.
had banded together and were like, we're going to write about women in their 40s suddenly developing magical powers. And I read some of them, and I think that that's great. I think that
Okay.
it's really fun because like you know I'm in my 40s. I would love some magical powers. It is time for me to get them. Thank you. Um, so, you know, we'll see if it happens.
We'll see. We'll see. That'd be. I didn't know like that was a thing, but like, I read a couple. And I was like, oh yeah, it works. Thank goodness they said what like. I usually don't like the term using women's fiction. I usually just call them contemporaries
Mhm.
because like I don't get like there's no like male fiction category really, even though they just get slunted under like action, suspense, or just fiction in general. So I usually like to call them contemporaries. And I was like, good thing you called them contemporaries because there's not enough romance to call this a romance. I was like, don't get it twisted. Some of them have like really light sprinklings where there is a love interest, but like it isn't like really you don't see a lot of that within like usually like the book one of the series. So like
Mhm.
calling it women's calling it women's fiction, I'm like, okay, I can adjust my expectations a little bit. I'm not gonna get the two main characters are not gonna probably get together in this first book if it's a whole entire series.
Yeah, like expectations are important when it comes to reading. Is something that I really, learned after really reading romance. It's
Mhm,
important to me, and I didn't think it was until I
mhm,
really started loving romance, basically.
mhm.
So
And did
yeah.
you feel like that kind of pressure a little bit when writing these books? Like you promise a premise and then like let's say do you feel pressure on like actually really delivering on that premise while still like taking your own licenses with it?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I guess it depends. Now I'm like,
Mhm.
maybe I do, maybe I don't. It's
Maybe I don't.
I yeah, I think I want people to like the books. I want people
Mhm,
to read them. I want people because, it's wonderful for me to talk about them, to share them, to have these stories come out of my head. Um,
mhm,
I guess what I want to do is balance the things that I want to do well against, sometimes commercial considerations, and
mhm,
so that I can, they'll take the long view of it and have a career, um,
mhm,
and also not piss people off, frankly, um,
mhm,
because you can actually really annoy people if you take a
mhm,
different direction. Um,
mhm,
so but I also do enjoy moving within what I do. I,
mhm,
there's people are like, oh, I want to be free, I want to be free, but there is some pleasure in seeing, okay, what can I do here and do well? Um, I mean, that's what we do within a lot of disciplines, basically.
mhm,
Playing the piano, you want to produce beautiful
mhm,
music, you know, you can't necessarily just plunk your hands on every key. If
mhm,
you want to knit,
mhm.
you don't just throw yarn into the air and hope that a sweater comes down. Um,
Yeah,
you
that's true.
want
Mhm,
you want a structure.
mhm,
Um, and so I enjoy, you know taking the structure and turning it into maybe something that isn't merely a structure. So
mhm, mhm. Yeah, that's really
like
interesting to hear your
yeah.
thoughts on that because I definitely feel like romance is probably one of the I was not to say only, but one of the genres where expectations are huge in the genre, and you will make people very angry, especially if you like, unless you're like Nicholas Sparks, and like you kill off your couple at the end of the book. If you call that a romance and you try to get that out to readers, readers will like roast it alive. Or if you promise like a bad boy billionaire enemies to lovers trope book
Mhm.
and people read it and it's nothing like that at all. Like I feel like romance readers like know what they want out of a book and like that can make or break authors for them if they don't deliver on what they're promising, especially in romance.
Yeah, because it is a genre where you do read it, um, in order to feel certain ways, in order to connect with
Mhm,
those feelings. And so if you add those jarring notes into it, sometimes people are going to be made uncomfortable, and like you can weather a certain amount of discomfort as a reader.
mhm,
I like to be a little bit challenged. That's
mhm,
But at the same time, I still like the structure. There's a safety in the structure, and so I understand. You know, um,
mhm,
I like to be able to go into a book and say, okay, these characters are going through some stuff right now,
mhm.
but I know at the end that they're going to figure it out, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And I guess a good segue is I wanted to ask you what are some of your favorite, it can either be all time, you can either do books or authors of romance books.
Okay. So recently, I read Along for the Ride by Mimi Grace, and I thought it was
Wow.
spectacular. It has a great premise. Um, two, and you'll love this too. It's enemies to lovers, um,
Ooh.
and it's like people who dislike each other intensely, hate each other, and they have to um, ride together in a moving van. They have to drive a moving van across country together. And
Ooh.
yeah, as a favor to the heroine's sister, the
Mhm.
hero's or the hero's best friend, right? Um,
Mhm.
and so it's already the premise is just so ripe, right? And so
Yeah.
it's very funny, it's very sexy. At the same time, though, it's done so delicately. Like the reason why they're enemies is because the heroine did something really sort of terrible at the sister's wedding a long time ago, and the hero was
Mhm.
like, you're ruining
Mhm.
the wedding, right? I don't want to give it
Mhm.
away. But you know, but the thing is, the heroine knows she did this and feels bad about it, and it's something that she's trying to work on, right? But it doesn't help that he is like this sort of rigid, like
Mhm.
perfectionist
It holds it
type.
against her.
Yeah. So, and holds it against her. But at the same time, she knows she did something that wasn't so great. And the thing is, as a reader, it's such a delicate balance. Like Mimi Grace, who wrote this,
Mhm.
is so astute. It's, you read it and you're like, yeah, that was really terrible. But at the same time, you see why she did it. And it's like
Mhm.
understandable at her age, her maturity level, and you see that she's trying to overcome it. Like for somebody to do something that you understand you dislike, maybe, and then, but also create that sympathy at the same time for who they were, that's
Mhm.
really hard to do.
That's
And
hard.
it's
Mhm.
just so, like, it's just a really beautifully astute book, I thought. Just all these wonderful little character things about it that just make the characters seem like they're really growing as people in front of your eyes. It's really good. Um, a writer who I absolutely love is Kate Claiborne. Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, have you read any? Yeah,
I love what was it? Letters and love letters?
love lettering. Yeah,
Love lettering? Yeah.
love
I read
lettering.
that one. That was
Yeah,
really good.
and Love at First is her latest, and she's also a really good friend. So yeah, so I absolutely adored it. It has like a Romeo and Juliet um, story line to it, and except that it's a romance still. Um,
Mhm.
Romeo and Juliet is not a romance, by the way, but
Yeah.
it has a Romeo
But
and
still people
Juliet.
think it's like a romance. They still think it's a romance. I'm like, nah, sorry. Your character, the main couple's not supposed to die then.
Yeah. So, but and she does it so she like her prose style. I just love it. I love how she writes, basically, and it's got a lot of heart, and it's just gorgeously written. Um, a writer who I love, who I feel like doesn't get like a ton of attention, is um, Meredith Katz. She wrote this book called The Cybernetic Tea Shop. It's like it came out maybe like a few years ago, um, but I think she's also re-released it independently. And it's female, and it's Ace, and
Oh.
it is uh, it's sort of set in a sort of alternate future, maybe, where human beings have had made AIs that were self-aware, and at a certain point, humans were like, okay, that's actually kind of unethical to have these AIs who are self-aware and make them work for us. So in this future, they've some of the AIs still exist, and one of the main character is an AI who runs this tea shop, and she's been doing it for like 100 years, I think, almost 100, maybe 50 years, I don't remember, but a long time since her owner died, because like that was her legacy and that was her purpose, right? But she still has thoughts, and she's worried about the tea shop, and one of her customers who has recently moved there is uh, the other heroine is a computer technician, and and the story is just the way they approach each other is so delicate, like so sensitive. The AI character is still sort of in mourning for the
For her
past,
owner.
and really wants to keep this legacy alive, and she can keep it going technically, um, but but it's a lot about grief and about moving on. And I think it's really interesting. Meredith Katz has also written a book called Smoke Signals, which I absolutely love. It's about like a dragon who has this video game horde, and who also turns into a person, right? Um, he hoards video games, and then he falls in love with the technician, not the technician, the customer service person who helps him through his horde of his game issues, basically. And it's like a sort of a cultural conflict kind of story, because dragons don't court quite in the same way as people do. So it's very interesting. It's male. I think it's fabulous. Um, E. Ottoman writes some really beautiful stories. One of the last ones I read was called, let me see, oh, The Longest Night, because it's set in winter. And it's a Christmas story in a lot of ways. Uh, Set in that a man has lost his job, and it's historical, by the way, and he goes to meet his pen pal, and because like he's lost his job, he has nowhere to go. His pen pal invites him, and then they go and they meet, and there's that delicious tension of like,
The
are they
chemistry.
going? Yes, right? Are they gonna?
Yeah.
Is this person who I've been writing to and is actually now my best friend going to like me or not? And it's so good.
That's like romance goodness right there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Who else? I mean, you know, so many names. I love Rebecca Weatherspoon. I think she just is
Mm.
writing some of the best romance around these days. Yeah,
Her
she's so
BDSM
good.
that she mixes in, I'm like, I love it.
So, let me see. Talia Hibbert. We talked about Talia before. I just, yeah, that whole series. I just love it. And her previous indie books too. They're just so good. Jackie Lau
They're all really good.
is great. Um, you should definitely talk to her. Um, I'm gonna keep naming names. Let me see. There's this book called, what was it called? Linos Catherine Thomas. I don't know if I'm saying the name correctly. Is Linos, Linos Catherine Thomas,
Oh
and
no,
she
I
wrote
haven't
this
heard that
book.
author.
Yeah, I think she's only got two books, and they're both novellas. Um, and and the second book by her, which I read, is about this. It's set in our contemporary world, but it's again a little bit magical, and it's about this violinist who is in love with her conductor. It's female, and but the thing is, the violinist has a terrible secret, and um, yeah, but
Dun, dun,
so
dun.
it's a terrible magical secret, and so like the pining, she they can't love each other because of this terrible secret, but they want to, but can we we cannot. And I just, it's agony, and it's wonderful at the same time. It's really good, and I also love the setting of being in an orchestra, a classical music orchestra, the way they talk about music and the way that works with the plot. I love that. Emma Barry wrote this great story, Appassionata, um, also about classical musicians. Um, and I guess I like classical musician stories, apparently.
Yeah.
But Emma also writes these great books about like politics, like people working not on like the extremely high levels of it, but like union
Mhm.
organizers, and she has also written this series with Genevieve Turner about, it's set in the 1960s during the space race, and it is so awesome.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's, I think it's called the Fly Me to the Moon series. Oh my god, so good. I love that historical time period too. It's like it's
Mhm.
so underused. And you know, the backdrop is just all this great, you know, mid-century stuff, and um
Mhm.
and and NASA and all that. It's just so wonderful. Must read. So yeah,
Oh, those
I could
are
go on.
those are like some amazing recommendations. Like I have not heard of like a single one, but like now I want to go pick all these books up. I was like, what? Maybe Talia was the only one, like, and Rebecca. I was like, oh yeah, I know those two. But the other was like, what? Like, it's such a range, like such a great recommendations. I will leave them all down below. So if everyone watching wants to pick up any of those recommendations, I'll leave them down below. And then my final question to you, Ruby, is what have been some of your favorite movies slash TV shows so far? It could be what you've been enjoying in quarantine or all time favorites.
So I have really loved. I was thinking about this because I tend to retreat to books, honestly, especially during
Hmm.
times of stress. But one thing that I loved was Dash and Lily on Netflix.
Oh, Netflix.
Yes, and it's based on a book. I've never read the books, and it's YA romance. Basically, it's about two book nerds who live in New York
Oh.
City. I wonder why I like this. It's basically like um like I think about that Homer car episode of The Simpsons. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Like this is
No, I
the
haven't.
so it's just basically a series built for me, I think. Um so it's you know, does Mindy like a cup holder in her car? Yes, she likes it right there exactly. But anyway, so this series is it's book nerds. Lily leaves a book in a big bookstore in New York, like the Strand, and
Mhm.
Dash finds it, and in it he finds this challenge, a book challenge basically, and it sends him across the city. And then he leaves the book there, and Lily ends up you know, he with a challenge, and he writes her another challenge, which sends her somewhere too. So they sort of leave each other these notes, um, and grow to know each other and like each other and themselves. You know, because you know
Mhm.
Christmas time is kind of a weird time for a lot of people, and it really captures that feeling of like loving books, but
Mhm.
also being young and sort of going through this whirlwind of people and holiday stuff and emotions, and you know sometimes that loneliness, but also
Mhm.
finding that connection in the middle of it, you know, in this
Mhm.
sort of
Mhm.
strange bookish way.
Yeah.
So I think the series is really good. So I really liked it. um, and you know I'm absolute trash for any sort of like romance series on Netflix basically.
It's
um
like Bridgerton.
right.
I feel like everyone and their mother has everyone, their whole family have probably seen at least a bit of the show at this point.
Right, exactly. I loved Sweet Magnolias. That one was a good one.
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
and you know they had Virgin River, which I honestly didn't love as much, but you know that's,
Mhm.
everybody has their own tastes, and you know I
Yeah.
understand that when you adapt things to television you also have to, you know, do certain things to make the drama go on, so I understood that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I have been watching these things. And as for all time stuff, you know, I loved Pitch, for instance. I feel like probably a lot of people come here and are like, I
Mhm.
love Pitch, I loved Selfie, why did they take Selfie off the air? um
So soon, like Pitch was so good. I'm so
it was
mad they
really
took
good.
off.
There's
It
this,
was short
yeah,
lived. It was such a good series.
it was so good, and the characters were just so great, and I just loved it. There's this book by Nicole Falls, um, called The Change Up, which really has those pitch vibes. It's about a female pitcher,
Hmm.
which it filled a little bit of that gap for me. So that was really great.
Hmm.
Um, and I liked Gilmore Girls. I like these talky, um, book centered
Hmm.
shows a
Feel good
lot, which is really
shows.
funny because they're TV. Why am I? And also I just love like old movies, old, movies with a lot of banter, basically. Like
Hmm.
I have my agent Tara and I have this whole thing from When Harry Met Sally. We just yell baby fish mouth at each other every now and then,
Uh-huh.
because it's just a weird thing to say to each other, and we love it, and it's from that
Hmm.
movie. So yeah, great
Yeah,
show.
those are some amazing picks. I haven't watched Gilmore Girls. I have to like say that. I feel like I'm the only one. But there is a new show on Netflix called Ginny and Georgia, which
Oh,
is like imagine Gilmore Girls but like brought into the 2000s, like 2020 and
okay,
more, I guess you could say it's more diverse a little bit. You
yeah.
have like a biracial main character,
Oh, cool. Okay,
um, younger brother, like they both have two different dads, and then her friend group is very diverse. Like I mean the characters are like drinking, like doing drugs, like talking about like sex and all that stuff. Like I'm like surprised. Like I immediately got the comparison because like you have like your kind of multiple love interests kind of going on. You have amazing Asian male romantic interest that is just he's such a cool character, and it's just like I love this show. Like if you love Gilmore Girls, I definitely think you would like it, Ruby. I haven't finished the whole first season yet. But like I finished like more than half of it, but it's a really fabulous show
I'm
if you
gonna
want those
try it.
Gilmore
I'm
vibes.
definitely, yeah. I mean, Gilmore Girls had like Lane. She was the character, and maybe I was very invested in Lane because, like, at that time, I
Hmm.
feel like Lane was Korean, and like there was just nothing else like
Mm-hmm.
on TV who was like an Asian girl with glasses, basically. So
Hmm.
I was really, and I was really, anyway, you didn't watch it, but the way they ended Lane's story on Gilmore Girls was really disappointing. So, so I'm going to watch this show. I am taking your recommend. I'm going to give it like that thumbs up on the Netflix app, and
On
I'm going to
Netflix.
make sure that, yeah, I'm going to make sure that I watch it. So yes, thank you. I need that.
Yeah, no problem. But thank you so much, Ruby, for coming on my channel. It's been a pleasure talking with you. For anyone who's interested in like buying the Uptown Collection series, I'll link all those links down below in the description box. So Amazon, you can go purchase the paperback, the ebook, and it's also available on audio. And as well as I'll link Ruby's all social media links. So if you want to follow her or stalk her on any of her social medias, that'll all be down there for you as well. But thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you guys with a brand new video. Bye, everyone.